Hello, welcome to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. So I'm deciding to do a little bit of a year in review so far. You know, I was thinking Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is opening this weekend. It's kind of the kickoff of the summer movie season. So I think it's a really good time to sort of look back at what happened in the year so far. It's been a really fascinating year. So there's definitely a lot to talk about. But I'm recording this on Saturday afternoon it's literally 4:20 right now. Not that I'm implying anything. Guardians of the Galaxy has been doing great the last couple of days. The estimates from yesterday are 56 million. Right now you're looking at $140 million opening for Guardians of the Galaxy. So we really have sort of kicked off the summer movie season with a huge opening. Remember, the original only did about 90 something. So that's a huge jump for that film. Really good stuff for Guardians of the Galaxy. I personally thought it was going to go higher. I was thinking more like 155, 160-ish. And I thought that there's a chance it could even go even higher than that. But it did not do that. It's sort of in the 140 range. So far is what the estimates say. But they're probably going to be pretty dead on with that. In any event, so what I wanted to do is just walk through, you know, as much as we can do of the top 10, top 20, maybe even top 30 of the year, and just do some hot takes on sort of whether the movie was successful or not, and just sort of some deep dives on certain movies and talk about why they're important and, you know, what it is about their performance that's going to live on, that's going to change the game, or is it just going to be kind of be forgotten, you know, a forgotten film. And we'll also talk about how the box office is changing in general, and how the industry is changing as much as I can sort of analyze as an amateur, because again, I don't have any sort of insider info into the accounting of these films and how well they're doing in terms of profit or loss, but we can definitely extrapolate a lot off of how they're doing in the box office and their performance this year. So that was my nerdy little rant. So let's get to it. I'm just going to walk through the top 10 first, and we'll see how far we go. So number one so far this year, discounting, of course, Guardians of the Galaxy and how well it does, was Beauty and the Beast. Its gross so far this year domestically is $483 million. Globally, it sits at 1.1, almost $1.15 billion. The breakdown there, 40% is domestic, 57% is basically 58% is international box office. And it opened at 174, which I think surprised pretty much everybody. I just don't know anybody who thought, besides a few of my friends who have children, you know, me as a mid 30-year-old person without a child, without a like quote unquote traditional family, like I'm not really in touch with like what children are excited about in terms of films and stuff like that. But all my friends who have kids said their children were just super psyched about this movie. And I think that, I don't know, I guess like that, you know, Beauty and the Beast growing up for me was like a classic, right? A classic Disney movie. And I'm kind of surprised that the younger generation of children, you know, people, you know, children born after 1995 or 2000 even, I guess, were super into this. Like, I guess, because I don't know why. I do not understand why Beauty and the Beast did so well. I think it's the end point of this rant I'm going to go on here. I just don't get it. And in past shows, I've talked about it a little bit. Sort of the film, I think, quality-wise, was underwhelming to a lot of people. But clearly that didn't matter at the box office in terms of like the business aspect of this and the popularity of it, is people just kept going to see it. Everybody wanted to see it. And you know, I think it was I believe it was the biggest March opening ever, because the last record was Batman versus Superman last year, which did I think 166 if my memory is right, at least in that range. So Beauty and the Beast destroyed the March record, $174 million opening, and right now it sits at $483 million here domestically. I don't think anybody thought it was going to be anywhere near that. I think conservatively, you probably would have thought a really successful run for this film would have been like $300 million, maybe like low 300s. Where it sits now is super surprising. I think to people inside and outside of the industry, just a very surprising run overall. And I can't pinpoint what it is. I can't pinpoint why it did so well. but I'll throw out a couple of theories. And one of the main theories I have of why this did so well was that it sort of reached, I hate to use this word, but meme status, right? Certain films, Jurassic World reminds me of this a lot. It's a really good example of this. When a movie is coming out, the hype gets to such a point where it starts a feedback loop, right? So it's almost like there's this great scene from Arrested Development where Tobias Funke is trying to get like his name spread around Hollywood. So he would like sneak into studio lots, go into their offices and just start talking about himself around the water cooler. It's kind of like that effect, or see that intention is that if people are talking about something, it has a sort of exponential social impact. Right. So if a few people are talking about it, really want to see it, that's great. But when it hits a certain tipping point or threshold, then the fact that people are talking about it makes other people want to see it. You know, they may even not have never seen the original Beauty Beast. They may really not have any really deep interest in seeing the film, but because other people are doing it and other people are excited about it, they want to be a part of it. And I feel like Jurassic World was a prime example of that when it opened a couple of years ago. And ironically, a similarly, I think, very mediocre film at the end of the day. But the fact is that opening weekend, a lot of people, probably like me, who were like, grew up with Jurassic Park. I remember going to see it with my parents when I was younger. I think I was, 12 or something when it came out? No, not even 11, maybe even 10. Yeah, I was 10. I remember that moment. I remember seeing it and remember being just completely and utterly blown away by that film. And so you had people like me who were super stoked for the nostalgic reasons of seeing Jurassic World, but then that started to permeate out, and then it started to hit younger people who maybe never even seen Jurassic Park, and then older people who sort of remembered the old film. And then everybody wanted to see it. And it becomes like, the term that they use a lot in the industry is like, or they used to, is 4 quad, right? The 4 quads are under and over 25 males and females. Those are your 4 quads. In order for a movie like Beauty and the Beast to do as well as it did, it needs to hit those 4 quads. Although I feel like that distinction is slowly eroding because the industry is changing so much that the 4 quads may not be as important as they once thought. Because like, what was the over 25 male equivalent here, or sort of poll here for Beauty and the Beast? I guess fathers taking their children to go see it, maybe. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is Beauty and the Beast had a special run, a sort of abnormal run at the box office because it was an abnormal social phenomenon, in that unlike the other films that were coming out this year, the hype hit a point where everybody, I would say, and this is just me throwing out a number, I would say 30 to 40% of the people who went to go see this went strictly because other people they knew were going. It had that sort of like, everybody wanted to be involved in it sort of situation, which happens every so often with cultural events, obviously. And every so often it coincides with the film. Like, the hype is just so much that everybody wants to be a part of this social thing that's happening. That's my main theory of why Beauty and the Beast did so well. Now, if you look at the nostalgia aspect of it and the Disney aspect of it, obviously people love the original film. I've seen the original film, obviously, a few times. It never struck me as a artistic classic by any such imagination. I always like Aladdin a lot more, and Little Mermaid I think is even better. So I guess, I don't know, there's something about this story and that original film that just got people on this hype train, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. And so it sits at 170, started at 174 opening weekend. It's at 483 now. I wish I could do mental math, but I have to use my calculator to figure out the current multiplier. Sits at 2.79 multiplier. That's actually lower than I thought, but it's technically only been out for about a month and a half. So this will keep going. My guess is that it'll at least hit a 3 multiplier, maybe 3.5. No, probably not 3.5. Yeah, it's definitely going to get well past $500 million. If you were laying down bets in January of this year, saying I bet you Beauty and the Beast is going to do $500 million domestically alone, I bet you among the box office nerds and analysts and, you know, people like that, I bet you maybe a quarter would take that bet. Not even, maybe like 10% of people would take the bet. So it's just sort of a strange but very fascinating box office run for Beauty and the Beast. And it's honestly, you know, despite the fact that I don't think the film is very good, it's something to analyze and to dive deeper in, because it has all these implications, you know, in the box office movie industry world, but also just culturally. There's a lot of like interesting tidbits you can pull from this successful run of this film. Not to get too college professor on you. So that was number one, Beauty and the Beast. Again, I think at the end of the day, kind of a mystery as to why it did so well. I think it was sort of meme culture sort of taking over, which was so popular, you know, has clearly shown how powerful it can be, especially with the election of Donald Trump, who is basically a meme president, right? Like, he was somebody who gained popularity and political power through memes. You know, where those memes came from, Russia, you know, white supremacists. I don't want to go into that, but that, you know, it's crazy. And I feel like Beauty and the Beast sort of rode on that. I guess you can call it meme culture, but I don't want to say it's social media, because there is a social dynamic here where things are getting repeated over and over again, which I think if you just say, oh, it was social media, that doesn't really capture it. There's the memeness of things. There's that repetition and that spread of a single concept that I think Beauty and the Beast sort of rode the wave of, on its way to $500 million domestically. Then at number 2 was Logan, which I think was also kind of surprising. I'm gonna use the word surprising a lot this podcast. I always pick like one word every podcast, so I just repeat it over and over again. Hope it's not too annoying. But I think Logan, I think when the trailers first dropped for Logan this year, and to give you the numbers right now, it opened at $88 million on March 3rd. Right now it sits at $224 million. The run overall, if you want to give it a short sort of answer, amazing run for Logan. You know, especially when you compare it to the older movies in the Wolverine series, and I kind of have to look it up because I don't remember this. I know one of them only did like $88 million total. So the Wolverine, X-Men Origins Wolverine came out in 2009. Opened at 85, okay, and closed at 179. So not as bad as I thought. Terrible multiplier on that though. That's awful. It means people hated the film. The Wolverine kind of feels like a what do you call it? A reboot name. Maybe it was, because the first one just didn't pull through with its multiplier. That opened in 2013, July of 2013. Opened at $53 million, ended at 132. A little bit better of a multiplier there, but not by much. Both almost just like around the 2x, a little bit over 2x multipliers. That's not what you're looking for with a film like this. To contrast that, you know, Logan's at 224 now. It opened at 88. It's already sitting at a 2.54 multiplier, and that's only going to go up because, you know, the movie's still around. It's not like it's completely gone yet. I guess it's been out for 2 months. And so I think the run overall for Logan, it felt like, I guess it is the final film for Hugh Jackman in that role, and it really had this dramatic feel to it. It did not look like a normal comic book movie. I think that's the biggest thing, signal that this is going to do a lot better than people thought it was going to do, were the early trailers, right? The early trailers were so well done with that Johnny Cash cover of Hurt, which is a Nine Inch Nails song, which is so weird even thinking about when that was popular. What was that, like 15, 20 years ago? I can't remember. To use that in the trailer in such an effective way, and Patrick Stewart in it, you know, he's like old and decrepit and like, I guess, dying. It felt really rich. It did not feel like another comic book movie, you know, in the same way that Deadpool felt really fresh when it came out last year. You know, Logan felt super interesting and super, you know, just, it felt like a new take on the comic book genre. Now, Deadpool definitely went the more self-parody pastiche type style where he was sort of making fun of comic book movies, Logan feels like almost like an artistic art drama on some level. It felt that way. Very dark and very brooding. And it paid off. And also the rated R rating, I think, really is paying off for these comic book movies. That's going to become the new norm. Like, obviously, like Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is open this week. I think it's probably PG-13. Obviously, that's not going to be R, right? But there is a market for rated R comic book movies, and Logan and Deadpool are the proof of that because they're two of the most successful films of the last couple of years. And people over the age of 17, 18 really want to see comic book movies not hold back, and they want to see violence, and they want to see sex, they want to be entertained on that level. Compared to something like Game of Thrones, like that's the standard of entertainment these days. It has to be pretty raw in terms of violence and sex. So I think the rated R comic book movie is here to stay, and I'm really interested to see what the next one is, because I'm thinking like Wonder Woman's not going to be rated R, Justice League's not going to be rated R. I guess Deadpool 2 is going to be rated R. I'm going to look that up though. What the next rated R comic movie is going to be coming up here soon. But Logan overall, the story on Logan, great run. The multiplier, as I looked it up, I was like, oh, this isn't as high as I thought it was going to be. It's okay. It's going to end probably 2.6, something like that. But its take's going to be, almost $250 million domestically. Internationally, it's doing okay. 381 internationally. Oh, wow. That's actually a lot more than I thought. So its total take so far is $605 million. Coming up in number 3 so far this year is Fate of the Furious. And I talked a lot about this, and I kind of feel like an asshole. Because I feel like the performance of this film domestically has been incredibly underwhelming compared to where I thought it was going to go, right? Because Furious 7 was, absolutely massive movie a couple of years ago. In terms of the series, just to give you the numbers off the list here, it opened at $98 million, which is way below the expectations for it. I don't care what tracking was. I don't care what the industry is saying. They were lowballing it because I think they were nervous about how it was going to do. It sits at $98 million opening, which is way below Furious 7, which came out in 2015, April of 2015. That opened at 147. Massive drop here. That ended at $353 million total. So Fate of the Furious, obviously Furious 8, as I also call it, opened much lower than Furious 7. It opened right in line with Furious 6, Fast and the Furious 6, to be precise. Right now, Fate of the Furious 6 sits at $200 million. The silver lining, I think, here, at the end of the day, domestically, it's going to end up below Fast and the Furious 6. You're looking at probably $220 million domestically. That's $130 million short of Furious 7. So that's where a lot of my animosity towards the performance of this film comes from. I don't like the series that much. The first couple are fun. Even the Tokyo one was fun. The stuff after that, because I have a chip on my shoulder about these films because they just feel quite brainless and, just like action movies for the sake of action movies without offering anything interesting. Now, they are great spectacles and people love them, obviously. I just felt really tired. And especially when the trailer came out for this new one, I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, they're not even fucking trying anymore. Like, you're gonna have a nuclear submarine. Like, what are you thinking? It's like, I don't know. There's a great term, a great website, TV Tropes, and they have all these wonderful sort of critical terms for things that happen on a TV series, and they can easily be translated to film. One of my favorites is Flanderization, and it's named after Ned Flanders from The Simpsons. And the entire concept of it is that a character will start out as a pretty, let's say, like dynamic, subtle characterizations. And I can't remember the specific examples with Ned Flanders, but what ends up happening is they become this extreme version of that character, and like little aspects of the character are played up to the point where it just looks kind of like almost grotesque in a way. And it's like too much. It's a very common occurrence in film and TV where if something becomes successful, I think Madman was incredibly guilty of this. When something becomes successful, the creators or whoever are thinking, oh, what made this so great? And they choose what they think made it so great and then accent and blow those aspects of the character or the story of the movie, of the TV show. They blow those aspects off so that's all you see anymore. I'm not a great at explaining it at all. I have a master's degree in art criticism. But it's basically okay, here's a great example. Like if someone was drawing a woman and they wanted to accent certain parts of her body, they'd make her boobs huge, right? Because that's what they think people want to see, or men, whatever. And they make them huge and bigger and to the point where they're like grotesquely large. You're like, well, that just looks weird. It's that phenomenon essentially, but with characters, if that makes any sense. That was totally absurd, but it makes sense in my mind. I think it's a good analogy. So Fate of the Furious is an example of that. They took all of these aspects of the film that they think of the series that they think people really like, and maybe they do, and they just blew those up to a grotesque version of themselves, to the point where just everything feels so over the top. The moment where the submarine breaks through the ice in that trailer, I was just like, why would you do that? Like, why would you take a series, despite my sort of criticisms of it, that started out pretty decently strong, Point Break with cars. The original is not a classic, but there was something there. There was something fascinating about those characters, and it was interesting and it was exciting. And then you just like basically throw in a ton of explosions in a nuclear submarine, and all the characters become sort of like fetishized versions of themselves, which is what flanderization really means. And you sort of just like, this is all pointless. This is meaningless, like schlock. This is like the gruel of movie action making. There's nothing here. There's nothing really interesting going on here. And that's how I felt about Fate and the Furious. And so that's why I kind of have a super negative take on how well it's doing. Now, domestically, I'm 100% right. Domestically, this is underperforming 100%. Internationally, I couldn't be more wrong. I'm totally wrong about the film internationally. It is crushing it outside the United States. It currently sits at $1.1 billion overall, which is a great take. $900 million is coming from foreign markets. Most of that China, I believe. I want to see exactly what it's doing in China here real quick. At China, it's done $373 million in China. I can't remember the entire deal that they did with the Chinese distribution firms. There were two of them, but basically every movie theater in China was going to play Fate of the Furious, essentially. And so it's doing incredibly well overseas, mostly lifted by China. At China, it opened at $184 million. Compare that to the United States. Now, obviously, they're totally different markets. There's a lot more people in China than there are in the United States. But China still does not have the power in the industry that people think it does. Because, and I'm not sure of the distribution deal they set up here, my guess is that they flooded the Chinese market with this film, but that means that they're probably not going to get anywhere near the 50% take or 40% take they get in the States for releasing the film. I'm talking about the studio here. So, it's a very mixed message with this film. But you know what? I'm going to follow my gut and say, in terms of its domestic performance, it is underperforming, and I think that's because of the poor quality of the film. It's too much Michael Bay. Although I do like Michael Bay these days, I've changed my mind on Michael Bay. But you know what I mean? Too much explosions, too much, too many quick cuts. It was overwhelming and too much, and it just didn't look, more than anything, it didn't look cool. And that's the one thing the Fast and the Furious movies have always had going for it. No matter what's going on at the time, it looked like a cool movie, like cool people driving cool cars. This just looked like, I don't know, Vin Diesel French kissing Charlize Theron, which is just gross for some reason. I don't know why it was gross, but it was. And like Russian nukes. It was stupid. It was like some 8th grader wrote it. In any event, so that's my Fate and the Furious rant. I apologize if any of you love that series, but I think it looked like trash. And I'm actually very happy it's underperforming domestically. I don't see that there's 2 more movies slated for that series. I think they're going to have to do kind of a reboot on number 9, just because people, especially in the United States, are going to be like, I'm not going to pay $15 to go see that schlock again. So that's Fate of the Furious, number 3. Number 4 is Lego Batman movie, which I think also kind of underperformed. It opened February 10th this year, opened at 53, which I felt was a lot lower than it should have been. It ended up at 174. It's probably mostly out of theaters. It's three months now, mostly out of theaters now. Not a terrible performance, but certainly not anything that the studio is going to be super hyped about, especially because they have another Lego movie coming out in September, the Ninja one. And so I think they thought these were going to be like really big cash grabs with not a ton of effort. Now, the original Lego movie is great. I really enjoyed it. It was really smart and funny, very snappy, had a lot of life to it. That's why it did so well. It opened at $70 million, ended up at about $257 million total. Lego Batman's gonna, not 100 less, but about $80 million less than that total take domestically. And so it's just not a great performance for the film. It seemed like on paper, I think like it was going to do similar numbers maybe to the original Lego movie, but maybe the idea that it's just Batman was too narrow for the film. I'm not really sure. It's like the tie-in of two of the biggest, film series right now. Not really, but Batman especially. You would think it would do better than this, but it just didn't quite perform, and I can't really figure out why. Fate of the Furious, I understand why it did poorly here in the United States, and I think I understand why it did really well overseas, because they love explosions. I understand why Logan did well. 100% I understand why Logan did well. Don't necessarily understand Beauty and the Beast, why it did well. I have a couple of theories that I've ranted about. But the Lego Batman movie, I just don't get why it didn't connect with people. I felt like it was going to open at like $70 million and end up at like well over $200 million. I think that's the mark that Warner Brothers wanted, $200 million domestically, and it didn't get there. Is it going to be a loss? Probably not. Is it going to be a push? Maybe. Definitely going to be some profit involved, I think, at the end of the day. So that's number 4. Number 5 was, I think this is the story of the year so far, Get Out. It currently sits at $173 million, making it one of the most successful horror films of all time. Shot for $5 million. Don't forget that. The production budget was $5 million, and its marketing costs were much lower than a normal wide release, well below like the $40-50 million range for a normal wide release. I'm probably thinking in the 20 range, if that. A lot of social media ads, which are cheaper and easier to connect with people, and you get a better ROI at the end of the day for those social media ads, because it connects people more directly. And so I think, Get Out opened at $33 million. That surprised everybody. I think people were thinking in the 20s would be good, would be really successful. The fact that it hit 30, just kind of out of nowhere, really. And the drops on this film, these are they feel like historically low drops, especially when you're talking for a horror film, because it's horror films most of the time pop off their opening weekend and they just collapse their second weekend. There's something about horror films where people just everyone wants to see in the opening weekend and want to get scared, and then that thrill goes away by the second weekend. Everybody's already seen it, and it just it drops by 60-70%. Terrible drops. Get Out did the exact opposite. It just kept growing. Not sure it's dropping a little bit here and there, but you're talking 10-20% each weekend. You don't see that. You just don't see that at all. There's another example of that down the list here. Another horror film shot for a really low budget that did just as well. Well, not just as well, but pretty darn close. So I think, what does Get Out really mean? And I've talked about Get Out constantly over this year because I'm just so excited about it. I think it means a couple of things. One, micro budget horror films, when done right, can make well over $100 million. They don't all have to be $40-50 million budgets like a Conjuring, which is a great film, don't get me wrong. Conjuring 2, I think, broke $100 million last year, if I'm remembering correctly. So micro budget horror films can make a ton of money. And I think we always knew that. We sort of forgot it. Horror is one of those genres where it's always around and it's always pretty successful. And it's successful because they keep the budgets moderately low. And then they throw in, hot chicks, nudity, a slasher, and that gets, for me, I'm a horror fan, always have been. I would go see it, if it's decently well done. And there's just a constant audience for those films, and they have the business economics of those down so well, where, it's not going to be the most profitable film of the year, but it's going to make $20 million, $30 million in profit consistently every year over and over and over again. And there's almost no other genre of film that's like that, where you can get consistent profit like that. And so I think Get Out basically says there is a possibility that if you put the right director in place, get the right script, get the right cast, and promote it in the right way, you can have hugely successful films. Instead of making that $10, $20 million, $30 million in profit, you can make $100 million in profit. I don't know what the plan was for this internationally. I hear it did not get a big international release at all, and I can check on that. Yeah, it's only made $21 million internationally at all. So they didn't push this internationally. I'm not sure why. Maybe the race dynamics wouldn't be seen the same overseas, I imagine. Something like that. In any event, Get Out shows you that if you put the right people in place and have a great piece of art, people will connect with it. There's a possibility that people will connect with it so much that it becomes a massive, huge, profitable film. The profit on Get Out is going to be, I can't even conjecture, but well over $100 million, I feel like. There's no way the cost of putting this film out is going to be more than $50 million, and they're going to make, even just domestically, they're going to make 80 million, 90 million. So you're looking at like at least probably a $50 million profit. I haven't included in the VOD stuff. It's going to be an incredibly profitable film. But the lesson there is that quality can lead to huge returns, right? That's one of those weird things about the box office is like, how does quality connect with how well it does at the box office? How does quality connect with ROI, the return on your investment as a studio? And I think the common wisdom among moviegoers, and just if you asked any American what they think, and be like, well, it doesn't matter, because like they put out really shitty movies all the time, like Terminator, or not Terminator, like Transformers, and it does incredibly well. Put like Fate of the Furious and it makes money, stuff like that. And it's like that is true. Like there's a lot of terrible films that make a lot of money. But every so often a film comes along that connects with the audience and is high quality and comes along just at the right moment at the right time. And I think Get Out really was, because race relations in this country have basically collapsed over the last 5 years. If you're really interested in stuff like that, check out the Gallup polls of race relations in the United States over the last 20, 30 years. You'll be very surprised what you see. Up until about 2012, 2013, race relations, as reported by all races, were very good. And then out of nowhere, they collapsed. I won't get into why they collapsed or what happened. I blame 100% the media, and also the fact that police were shooting black men in the back constantly. That also had something to do with it. But it was that, race relations have basically been inflamed. They're kind of off the charts bad right now. And it kind of reminds you of like the LA riots and the Rodney King and that whole era of American culture. When Get Out came out, coming out right now, it just feels right for some reason. It feels like it's a topic we needed to explore as a culture, everyone together. And I think by going to see that, it's sort of like diving into those really uncomfortable feelings about racism that we don't want to talk about, right? And so high quality movie, super low budget, right time, and you get a super grand slam like this is like winning the World Cup. I mean, this is just like the Get Out phenomenon this year is outrageous. And so back to my original point of why this is important. It's important because I think studios understand that sure, you can do micro budgets, but if you do a micro budget that's high quality, there's a chance to make 10x your money, and as opposed to 2x your money. So there is a chance to really make a ton of profit here if you do it right. And I think also horror as an exploration of societal, or horror as a social critique, which is what it always has been, but always goes through these weird phases where it doesn't do that. It's like you'll have the stuff from the 70s, and I always talk about these films, but especially Wes Craven, Last House on the Left, and The Hills Have Eyes, and I Spit on Your Grave. You know, these films were like atom bombs socially. Atom bombs going off. Can you imagine being one of the first people in like a New York City theater to see Last House on the Left? Like, I can't even imagine that, because one of the most vile, disgusting, unsettling, but at the same time one of the best horror films ever made. It's like throwing a grenade into a crowd. It's just like unbelievable. It's just nuts. In horror, and that's why I think horror attracts a lot of people, why it's so attractive to a lot of people, because there is that possibility for that reaction. It can really horrify people, and sometimes on an almost primal level. Wes Craven very much understood how that worked, and he did Hills Have Eyes, which is almost as equally as disturbing. Because the point I'm trying to make is that in the 70s, you had a lot of social criticism. I'm also thinking of, this is the 60s, Night of the Living Dead, but in the 70s, Dawn of the Dead, which I think is one of the greatest American films ever made, and one of the best critiques of American-style capitalism that exists on film, which is, you know, back then, people are so sometimes uncomfortable with those words, but like back in the 70s, that was pretty normal. Like people were like, yeah, there might be some problems with capitalism, and nowadays it's like people are like kind of iffy on it. So our, you know, horror movies have always been a vehicle for social critique, but it goes in and out of fashion. In the 80s, that was less so. The 70s was extremely all about social criticism. The 80s, and these are totally broad strokes, so I know there's some exceptions. The 80s didn't feel like that at all. It felt very schlocky. Just felt, you know, like Friday the 13th didn't really have a lot of social criticism to it, did it? It was just a slasher movie. Bloody Valentine, stuff like that. All those movies. Halloween even, not a lot of criticism there. Not a lot of social criticism. Now, Nightmare on Elm Street had a ton of criticism. Again, Wes Craven. And Romero did Day of the Dead in the 80s too. Those are sort of exceptions. The 80s felt like very just manufactured horror movies, like a consumer product. Nothing really that unsettling at the core of those stories. In the 90s, you had the ironic period of horror movies, and again, Wes Craven headed that up. You've seen the pattern here. And Wes Craven, I think he passed away last year. He's basically, I can confidently say that Wes Craven to me is probably, I think, one of the most important filmmakers in American history of the last 60 years. And he never got the respect he deserved because he was in the horror genre, and the horror genre was always sort of, you know, third class as opposed to like artistic dramas and stuff like that. But I guarantee you there's more art in Nightmare on Elm Street than 90% of art films that are out there. In any event, I'm like going on sub rants of rants now. Anyway, so the 90s was ironic. I Know What You Did Last Summer, Scream. They all copied that. Everybody talks really fast and everybody's super clever. And there's no motive for the killing. Like that's like the whole postmodern horror thing. That started and that lasted through the found footage stuff of the late 90s and early 2000s, even to now with Paranormal Activity. There wasn't a lot of meat on the bone with horror films. Even looking at stuff like The Conjuring or Annabelle, super well done horror films, not much to the story. Like it's a horror film. It's just very, very well done genre pieces. But then what we started to see, and I pinpoint It Follows, because that was the first one that came out that felt so incredibly different. And the social criticism in that film is just right in your face the entire time. And that's one of the reasons why I love it. It was like a mixture of John Carpenter with Wes Craven. It just felt really in your face, very visceral, like a real heart-pumping thriller. But there was a lot of meat on that bone. Sometimes people would say, it's about STDs, stuff like that. Sure, but like there's a lot more going on there, I think. That was the first movie I'd seen in forever that felt like it had the goal of questioning culture, questioning society on some level, whereas the horror movies of the 80s and 90s, for the most part, not all horror movies in the 80s and 90s, did not have that element. And then you had that, and then you had The Witch, which I think is probably better than It Follows. That was even more visceral. The Witch felt like it was something that Wes Craven would have done in the 70s. It had this just primalness to it. And a lot of people hated that film because it wasn't like a postmodern horror film. They're like, well, where's the jump scares? You know, why am I supposed to be scared? This isn't like a scary movie. This isn't a horror movie. But it is. It's a naturalistic horror movie that if you don't connect with and you don't go along with, then yeah, you're not going to really get a lot out of it. Because on some level, you know, the art, I don't want to say the art is so deep. The art is philosophical, right? It's questioning certain things about evil and about femininity. And if you don't have the toolkit to ask those questions along with the film, you're not going to get that much out of it. And I think that's what happened with a lot of people. Like, what is The Witch really going to mean to you if you've never taken a class on feminist theory? Like, or you never like know that much about feminist theory and I know a class about it, or read a book about it, or hell, read the Wikipedia article about it. You know, if you don't have those intellectual knowledge touch points and that lens, then you can't see the film the way the director, I think, intended it to be, which is a phenomenal horror film. In any event, the whole point I'm trying to make here is that societal criticism is now back in horror, and it's doing it really well. It Follows, The Witch, and now Get Out. Those are my three trifecta sort of trilogy here of art, you know, social criticism in American horror film. And Get Out has been by far the most successful of those three and has really connected with the people on a very deep level. And I think what we're going to see over the next 5 to 10 years is a revival of the horror genre of like, which we've probably never seen. Because back in the 70s, it was a very loose group of people who, you know, there wasn't any social media. A lot of those films were never seen by a lot of people. Like Last House on the Left, they basically made up a rated R rating. They never sent it to the MPAA. They just made it up and put the thing in the film and doctored it and said, oh yeah, this has been rated by the MPAA. You can't obviously do that kind of stuff these days. And so it might have been a little bit more guerrilla back then, but I think with the more connected society we have today and the fact that there's so much free or easy access to film and distribution, that we're going to see this huge revival of horror film. And I think Get Out has been the tip of the spear of that. And so I honestly could talk about that for days on end, and I don't want to bore you with my horror theories and genre, talk about that stuff. But I just want to, you know, Get Out, I think, is the biggest story of the year so far in terms of film. Not just film in terms of art criticism, but film in terms of business as well. So that was number 5, Get Out. Number 6 was Kong Skull Island. Opened at $61 million back in March 10th. It's at 165 so far right now. I don't think it's going to stick around that much longer in theaters because it's hitting that sort of that Mendoza line. That's per theater average is pretty low. But it kind of had a higher multiplier than I thought it would so far. It's at 2.7x its multiplier. What that tells me essentially is that people didn't necessarily rush out to see it. Like I didn't see it opening weekend. I think I saw it the weekend after. I really wanted to see it though, because the trailers looked amazing. And I think overall people went to go see it. They liked it enough to tell the people that they thought it was pretty good. And that's why it has that, you know, high 2x multiplier now. Overall performance, I people who listen to this podcast, which are probably not that many, I actually don't even keep track of listenership. So, if you do listen to this podcast, shoot me a message on YouTube or SoundCloud and say, hey, like really enjoy it. Cause right now I often feel like I'm just talking to the void, but I honestly don't give a shit. That's why I keep doing it. I talked a lot about Kong Skull Island this year so far. And I think the overall, it's kind of a mixed message. I think it's going to be a push at the end of the day for Warner Brothers. The production budget was way too high for this film. Way too high. And the marketing probably well over $100 million globally just on marketing. $185 million budget. That's just outrageously too high. Like you can't go that high for a movie like this. If you're at $185 million production budget, I'm going to expect it to make at least double that. or close to double that, I guess. Just domestically alone, it's not going to make back the amount of production budget. That's not good news. Now, is it going to be a huge loss for Warner Brothers? I don't think so. I think they're going to find ways to cut corners on the VOD streaming TV stuff to make it work out at the end of the day, but it's not going to be a largely profitable film, I don't believe. So that was number 6 so far this year. Number 7 was The Boss Baby, opened at $50 million, only about a month and some ago. That opening was a lot higher than I thought and most people thought. I think people were looking at like low 20s for the opening, and it does 50. It's just weird. It's sitting at 151 so far, 3x multiplier. Only a month in, it's still a 3x multiplier. That's really great. It is a children's film. Children's films have multipliers usually over the 3x line there, so that makes sense. But huge overperformance for The Boss Baby. I just don't get it. I don't understand why. I thought the whole, Alec Baldwin basically playing like a Donald Trump-like little baby would be a huge negative for the film, but maybe not. I mean, the trailer looked really good. It looked like it was very, very well done children's film. So I think the quality spoke to people. I don't think it came out. It only came out a couple weeks after Beauty and the Beast, so it wasn't like there weren't any children's films out. But for whatever reason, it connected really well with people. Maybe the Trump thing actually helped it at the end of the day. So Boss Baby so far this year, number 7. Number 8 was Split. A really good story behind this one. Opened at $40 million in January. January is becoming a time to open horror movies for whatever reason. And Split's a good example of that. There was one last year too. I forget what it was. And I believe the sequel to Split and Unbreakable, because they're connected sort of universes. This is, Split is M. Night Shyamalan's real comeback. The Visit was like his minor league tryouts. And now with Split, with its super low budget and ended up at 138, lower than Get Out though, right? Both by Blumhouse, I believe. Maybe co-produced by Blumhouse, I think. Blumhouse and Universal. Split has done well enough where M. Night Shyamalan is no longer in the doghouse, right? Last Airbender was like maybe one of his last chances, and then they're basically like, all right, like we're gonna give you like $5 million and see what you can do. Like, and if you can make something up with that, then you're good. And it turns out that's where he shines. M. Night Shyamalan, if you give him a huge budget, he's going to blow it on stupid shit and it's going to be awful. If you give him a strict budget, he will do something fantastic. And he did that. Okay. People love Split and it's great. I did not like the film at all. I thought it was really boring and not really interesting, but whatever. My opinion doesn't matter because people loved it and they're going to see it. So Split ended up at 138. It's going to lead to the sequel, I believe. I don't know if it's going to come out. It might come out January 2018, or is it 2019? I'm not sure. But anyway, he got greenlit to do the sequel, and so it's a huge success for everybody involved, and really surprising. People loved the film. I saw it like a month after it came out on a Saturday, and like the theater was packed, and I was like, this is weird. It opened a lot higher than people thought, but it just kept going in the same way that Get Out did. It just didn't stop, and its multiplier is well over 3. It's gonna basically 3.4. That's outrageous for a horror film. You almost never see that. I mean, the horror movies that I look back to, they sort of have that feel, or something like Sixth Sense, where it was like a cultural movement. Split wasn't as big as that, but it was kind of a mini cultural movement. I think among younger people really liked the film, like under 30s. But great performance by that film. And, M. Night Shyamalan basically has a door opening to keep making movies, which I think is great because I love him. And I think he is derided, not necessarily unfairly, but people go back and pick apart his movies like The Village and Signs and Unbreakable. Those are all, I'm going to say it, like, they're great American films. Sixth Sense is a masterpiece of film. It's a masterpiece. Unbreakable isn't that far. I mean, Unbreakable's amazing. And go back and watch The Village. When I saw The Village when it first came out, I was so pissed off by the twist ending that I couldn't see the film for what it was. Now, when it's been on before, it's it's incredibly well done across the board. And the twist, you know what, makes sense and it works. I don't even care anymore. It's an A+ for me. So I'm very glad that M. Night Shyamalan is sort of back in the saddle again, and the studios are trusting him more. And I hope he sticks with the horror comic book genre, because I think that's where he shines. So that was Split number 8. Number 9 was 50 Shades Darker. Opened at 46, well below the 85, I believe the original opened at, or was 80 something. This one is going to be kind of DOA. I saw the third movie listed as coming out, and I couldn't pinpoint when it was coming out. I forgot what it's coming out. Oh, okay. So next February, February 18th. So 50 Shades of Grey, the original, opened in 2015, opened at $85 million, grossed $166 million overall. Phenomenal performance for that film. 50 Shades Darker obviously opened this February, opened well below that $85 million, only at $46 million. It's going to end up at $114 million overall, about $52 million short from the original. There's not much to say about this, despite the fact that this feels a lot like the YA phenomenon. Ever since Harry Potter and then the Hunger Games, Twilight. I guess Harry Potter was kind of the start of the whole book, making movies out of books, and they're huge, massive successes. But Twilight was really the YA novel, young adult novel phenomenon really kicking off when it was made for like $10 back in like whatever it was, 2006, 2007. It did amazingly well because of the audience of the book. And I think that, 50 Shades Darker is obviously a part of that. Now, it's not YA, it's for a little bit older. But it has that feel where the first one pops off, everybody wants to see it. But the quality was terrible. I've seen the first movie. It's awful. And now like the company feels obligated to make more sequels, because they want to make more profit, but the profit's going to quickly go away on these. I'm not even sure how well this is going to, this will definitely make a profit. I think the 50 Shades Darker, but the next one, it might be in trouble. I just don't think it's going to make a ton of money or anywhere near the profit that Universal thinks that wants to make for it. Rounding out the top 10 here was John Wick Chapter 2, opened at $30 million here in the domestic market in February, closed out a week ago actually at $92 million overall domestically. Huge win for John Wick. The multiplier's 3x. That's great. People liked it. The original became kind of like a cult classic almost instantaneously. Nobody really went to see it when it came out. And then on streaming and VOD and Netflix or whatever, it just became this kind of weird touchstone. People online love Keanu Reeves. Go on Reddit and there's like a I love Keanu Reeves post, essentially. Like they keep on telling the same stories about how he's such a nice guy. He's become a meme. No, that all extends back to the sad Keanu meme, which is one of my favorite memes of all time, which is him eating a sandwich alone on a bench. And he just looks sad. And so for whatever reason, he's become like this cult icon. I'm not really sure why. And I really couldn't explain it if you put a gun to my head, but it is what it is. People loving Keanu Reeves is the reason why John Wick Chapter 2 has done so well at $92 million. The third one will come out and it will be successful. I think if they put the budgets low enough on these films where they make a nice return on them. And I think it's a big win for Keanu and for the series of John Wick. On number 10, I've really kind of like dragged on here with a lot of my meandering rants. So I want to quickly power through the rest of the top 20 and call it a day after that. And maybe we'll talk about some broader themes here. Number 11, Power Rangers, opened up about a month and some ago. Opened at $40 million. Decent opening at 84 right now. 2x multiplier. The overall take on this one is the budget was way too high, so it's going to have trouble making money at the end of the day. That series is gone. I don't think it's not performing well to really make another one. Number 12, A Dog's Purpose. There's Dennis Quaid film about a dog through different generations or different dog lives, I guess. Dog reincarnation. This one had some trouble because of that PETA video that came out where the dog was apparently being mishandled on set. But honestly, it really didn't seem to hurt it all that much. It opened a lot lower than I thought it was going to. I was going to think like high 20s, low 30s, but it ended up opening 18 million, which does not sound great. But for a kid's film, it's at least going to do a 3x multiplier. So you think it's going to end at like 54. It actually ended up 64. So it's a little bit over a 3x multiplier. So at the end of the day, I think it's a pretty good performance for A Dog's Purpose, despite the fact of all the negative press that it had. And so that was number 12 so far this year, was Dog's Purpose, decent performance. The Shack, kind of a similarly themed Christian film, opened at 16 in early March, ended up at 57. That's a good performance for that film. $57 million for that. I mean, I can't imagine it cost more than $10 million to make. Good performance for that. They have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 listed already. That's just for a single day. It did $56 million. That kind of puts things in perspective for you, that a movie as big as Guardians of the Galaxy already cracks the top 15 with a single day take at the box office for the entire year so far. Not much to say about that. We'll talk about that probably next week. The Great Wall, the Chinese co-financed Matt Damon film, opened at 18. A lot of openings at 18, 16 in that range. Ended up at 45. It's kind of fascinating to look at. So the Great Wall opened at 18. So did Dog's Purpose. Dog's Purpose ends at 64. Great Wall ends 20 million below that. Right. So there's just like really a tale of completely different performances. The Great Wall was an experiment film. Essentially, it's like how deeply can we get invested with the Chinese film industry and see how it works out. And it just, for whatever reason, that partnership just didn't work well. And the final result, I think, is going to be a pretty big loss across the board for everybody. Only making $45 million at the box office for a big film like that just doesn't make any sense. Poor marketing, poor film quality. The trailers look terrible. I couldn't even tell what the movie was about. Obviously it's about the Great Wall, but like, what the hell does that mean? The marketing was piss poor across the board. It's the major reason why it didn't do well. Not the fact that it's co-financed and co-shot in China or whatever. Just a bad product at the end of the day. Number 16, Triple X, The Return of Xander Cage, opened at 20, way below where it should have been. Ended at 44. Awful. Proves that Vin Diesel alone cannot drive a movie. Want another example? Look at Last Witch Hunter from last year, I believe. Awful film. Awful movie. I caught it on pay cable the other day as a trashy film. So Vin Diesel better stick to those the Furious series if he wants to make a lot of money. Number 17 was Ghost in the Shell. Opened at 18. Awful. Ended at 40. Just a disaster of a film. Deadline had one of the better articles I've read this year about box office analysis was Deadline's article about Ghost in the Shell and how it's going to lose well over $70 million. I think it's going to be well over $100 million loss. Just the wrong product at the wrong time. The quality of the film doesn't seem to be like it's poor at all. It just seems like it just didn't connect with anybody on any level. And I thought the marketing was pretty decent too. I just don't think there was an audience for this film. They should have known that before they pumped in, $200 million into this thing. So it was number 17. Number 18, Going in Style, the Zach Braff sort of tale of three older men who decide to rob a bank in New York City. Looked really good marketing. Opened at 18. Did every movie open at 18 this year? Opened at 18, ended at 39 so far. That one's only been out for about a month, so it's got a little bit more in its run. I think that's an okay performance. I thought that this movie could have been a lot higher than that. I would have wanted it to open super wide and make like 20 something million and end up at well over 3x. I would say $70-80 million would have been my goal for that film. And I think Warner Brothers New Line really dropped the ball with it because the quality looks great, amazing actors, really good director. Just did not market appropriately, especially in the final 2 weeks. Number 19 so far this year is The Smiths, The Lost Village. $13 million opening, $39 million so far. Awful. That series is dead. Number 20 was Monster Trucks, which opened at 10 million. Who went to go see Monster Trucks opening weekend? I really want to know who these people are. That's like a whole specific demo. Ended at $33 million total. I believe Paramount wrote this off before it even opened up, like $100 million loss. I mean, these losses are so, that's why I love the box office, because you know, a movie that does incredibly well can make $300 million. Like the number one movie of the year, you know, you're talking well over $200 million in profit. That's profit. That's more than you had than you started. $200 million in profit. And then you have stuff like Ghost in the Shell and Monster Trucks, where it's going to lose like at least $100 million each one of them. And you're like, how do you lose $100 million? Like, how do you literally do that? And still keep your job? Like, because if you lose $100 million, you need to have, you know, 10, 20 films be profitable, number one, which is already hard, but be profitable enough to offset that loss. I mean, that's a devastating hit to a company. And I think sometimes when people think about box office and they think about business in general, there's always, you know, Hollywood accounting and all these little terms. At the end of the day, they're products, right? And if a product loses $100 million, that is a catastrophic failure from a business perspective. No matter where you want to hide the loss at, that loss is gone, right? That money ain't coming back. And so, you know, looking back, you know, if you take a look back at the entire year, you know, Beauty and the Beast, huge overperformance. Logan doing really well. You kind of look at the whole thing, you know, what's the big message here? Like, obviously, I talked a lot about Get Out and Split, especially Get Out, but smaller budget horror films are going to be huge for the next 5 to 10 years. And horror, I think, has really been revived as a genre. You know, no longer are really good horror films going to cap out $100 million box office take. You know, Split and Get Out can prove that you can shoot a movie for under $20 million, even, you know, in Get Out's case, a lot cheaper, $5 million, and make well over $100 million at the box office. And so that's a really big story. I think another big story is that, like, cult films can become profitable films, sequels. That's like John Wick 2. Or even looking at, like, that's a really fascinating case, because I remember it coming out. I remember the original not doing well, but I remember 1,000 people telling me it was amazing afterwards. And so that was one of those movies that found its second life via streaming and VOD, which doesn't happen that often, but it did happen in this case, and that was going to be a third movie. So there is sometimes life after death for some of these very recent cult films. The Lego series is kind of not, it's not printing money like I think Warner Brothers thought it was going to. You know, obviously the Disney live action films, because of the success of Beauty and the Beast, they're going to be big. I think Lion King's in the works, and Little Mermaid and Mulan and Aladdin. Apparently they're just going to release all these live action versions of them. If they do as well as Beauty and the Beast, why the hell not? Look out for more rated R action comic book movies, because Logan and Deadpool did so well. I can see this becoming a big thing. Fate and the Furious series is on its way down. Furious 7 is going to be the pinnacle of that entire series, and so the rest of the movie is going to make less and less money. Children's films are a really good way to make cash, unless you're Smurfs. This whole entire year so far, you know, the children's films have done so well. Even the underperformance by Lego Batman, it still made $174 million. The Boss Baby, $151 million. I'm crazy. I think that's the sort of the more negative stories are that, you know, the Ghost in the Shell, I think, is a really interesting failure, because it did seem high quality. They had a really big star. It seemed like a really cool thing to do. But there just wasn't a real audience for that film. And I think that's going to lead to $100 million loss for Paramount. Paramount had a rough year so far. They had Ghost in the Shell, they had Monster Trucks, and they had Triple X, all which were huge losers. I don't know what the status of their company is right now. I don't know if they're getting sold or getting shut down or bought or whatever. I know Sony's in real trouble. Sony had one movie in the top 20, and it was Smurfs. Huge underperformance. The other one, the top 30 is Life, which also was a huge bomb. So, the big stories are the horror thing. I think is my favorite story about this year so far. Just the smaller budget horror films doing so well and connecting so well with the audiences, and they keep coming back for more and more. And you could tell that with the drops. They just did not have normal horror drops, so you could tell something special is happening. And I think with the bigger bombs that you're seeing, like the Ghost in the Shell and the Triple X and the Great Wall, and Smurfs and Monster Trucks, is that studios are hitting that inflection point where the losses are becoming much bigger than the risks. And what I mean by that is that they're starting to lose massive amounts of money. And you're seeing like studios like Sony who are in real trouble of being shut down and sold. And so these losses are becoming huge and real. And they're not $10 million losses. They're $100 million losses. Ghost in the Shell, Monster Trucks, Triple X is going to be a huge loss. Great Wall is going to be a pretty huge loss. I think you're getting to the point where the losses are going to make studios become super, super risk averse. And they'll start pumping out Aladdin live action and, Lion King live action. And they might start cutting movies like Triple X and like Ghost in the Shell. It was sort of, a brand new IP for film wise. There was an old Ghost in the Shell movie, but it was kind of felt like a very original thing to do. They're not going to do that anymore, right? They're going to cut those movies out. And what I see them doing is cut the big budget movies like that out, and they're going to shift that money to movies like Split, Get Out. And I think you're going to see that this year, where there's going to be the sure bets, the live action Disney stuff, Marvel, any of the comic book movies that are well done. Those are surefire hits, right? But the middle, those movies made for like $50, $100, $150 million, though, I think a lot of that money is going to get shifted downwards instead of upwards. And they're going to start taking more risks on smaller filmmakers, like Jordan Peele, who did Get Out for $5 million. Like, that to me is what I've always seen happening with the industry. It's just taken an extra decade to get there, I think. Because at the end of the day, if you want to make money off films, you got to make them for a lot cheaper than you're making them. And they have to be a lot higher quality than they used to be, because TV's better than film now, essentially. There's better content on TV and there's a lot more of it. And so now films are competing with television for eyeballs and attention spans, and they're losing. And in order to combat that, I think studios are going to have to take a lot more artistic and creative risks, but they're not going to do that spending $100 million on a Ghost in the Shell film, which has no film series leading up to it, because there's no built-in audience there besides the people who know with the graphic novel, which isn't, a huge amount of the population. So they're going to look for surefire hits in sequels and big budget movies with built-in IP, built-in, audience for that, or they're going to shift they're going to shift money downstream to smaller filmmakers to play risks, to make risky films and artistic films within genres. Like Get Out, you can say is an art film, but it's an arty horror film. I think that's what's going to happen. A lot of the studios are just going to throw money at smaller filmmakers to make genre-esque films that are kind of out there. And I think it's going to be awesome. I'm really optimistic that more films like Get Out and Split, even though I hated Split, it was still a fascinating experiment for a film. I think that's going to be the future, and I'm really excited about it, because that's what we've seen in Netflix original productions, is that they found that if they made stuff that is good and people like it, they will show up. You just have to find a way through, not to get nerdy, but risk analysis and risk management, so that you're not spending $185 million on a Kong movie. Like, that's stupid. Or, I don't know how much Power Rangers cost, but it was probably a lot of money. $100 million. That's too much money. Like, it's way too much money. Like, you want what I think they should be going towards is something like, you know, sub 50, sub 30, even lower. Make a lot of those movies. One of them's going to hit. It's kind of like startups. Like you give a startup $10 million, you give it to like 50 different startups. One of them is going to hit it so big that it will pay for all those other investments, and then, you know, 5x that original investment you put into all those companies just through one win. And I think the film industry is becoming like that, kind of like the startup world, where you take a bet on 10 different films and one basically hits the jackpot, and that's what you need. In any event, that's sort of the year so far. I will probably do an episode this week, maybe about Guardians of the Galaxy and maybe about the top 10. We'll see. I may just wait till the week after to put another episode. As always, thanks for listening, guys. And if you have any suggestions or requests about the show or any comments, just like reach out on SoundCloud or YouTube. I always check that stuff. So just let me know. All right, take care.